A very good morning, students. Today we are going to start with a new chapter, but a familiar chapter. Means the method might be used in every chapter, but we have not given it a name. Right? So what we are going to find, we have learned till now algebraic expressions, and you saw variables were there. Now in this chapter we will be learning how to find out the values. But in order to find out the value of variable, we need a equation. Yes or no? And what is an equation? When value is on the LHS side and a value is on the RHS side and both are equal. Yes or no? Then only we say it as an equation. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
This is the only condition when a statement is said to be equation. So, if a statement is in the form of equation, then we can find, with that help of that, we can find the value. Right? So, the motive of today's class is to solve the equations. What is the motive of our today's class is?
Ma'am,
Ma'am, to
solve the
solve the equations.
Solve the equation.
equation.
Solve the equation. In the class 6, in class 6, you have learned how to frame the equation from a given statement. Yes or no? Or given condition. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now we will
Yes,
be
ma'am.
learning the second step. What is the second step? What after creating an equation? We will be solving it. Okay. So let's take any question. Or come to page 108. Come to page 108. Question 1 से any question whichever you want, I'll do. Question 1, any part, whichever you want. We'll select.
Ma'am,
Yes? Question number
ma'am, it's not.
H. H.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, before starting any question, from the first day onwards, we were using a method known as transposition. Yes? Yes or no?
yes, ma'am.
Transposition.
Yes,
What
ma'am.
does this transposition do? When the value is weak in transposition, what we do? Whatever value, we do what? Variable, we keep the variables on the LHS side. Yes? Try to keep the variables on the LHS side and the constants on the RHS side. First thing, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
This is our motive. Now, in order to do so, the values are taken from one side to the other, right? Values are taken, numbers, so with the sign. If a plus positive operator goes to the RHS side, what does happen? What it happens to it? What happens to it? It
Ma'am, it will
becomes
be minus.
Ma'am, minus.
very
Ma'am,
good.
minus. Ma'am,
When a
minus.
minus sign goes to the RHS side, what happens?
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
plus.
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 Plus. Vice versa. Right or wrong? Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
When a multiplication sign goes to the RHS side, what happens?
Ma'am, it will
Ma'am, divide.
Divide. And when a divide goes to its RHS side, what happens?
ma'am,
Ma'am,
multiplication.
multiplication.
If the whole equation, if the whole set of equation is taken to the RHS side, what happens?
Ma'am, no change.
Ma'am, no change.
Interchange, right? If we interchange the LHS with RHS, there is no change in size, right? Interchanging of LHS and RHS is done. There is no change, right?
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
so all the rules are known by you already, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So, was wrong that we have done in every chapter this thing, but we are just giving a name to it. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's start with that. Then I think so this is a very easiest exercise of the whole chapter book for you for today. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So
Yes,
you
ma'am.
said to me to do H1. Let's see. Minus A upon 11
Ma'am is equal to 18 upon 55.
Equal to 18 upon 55.
variable is on the LHS side,
Ma'am,
but this is the
55.
concept. So what we will do? We will try to take it on the RHS side.
Ma'am, your voice is not clear.
So see the board, the voice will be
And ma'am,
clear.
board is also not clear.
Okay, wait.
Ma'am, board is also blurred.
Okay. Now, when LHS and RHS is written together, when LHS and RHS is written together, we put an implies that sign. Implies that का statement का मतलब sign का मतलब इसका मतलब है. What does implies that denote? इसका मतलब है और equal to
मैम
denote
मतलब है.
बराबर. Understood? Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
So when
Yes,
LHS
ma'am.
and RHS are written together, we put the sign as implies that, not equal to. Okay. So minus A will be here. Now we will be taking this 11 to the RHS side, so it became 18 by 55 into 11. Am I
Ma'am, into
correct?
11.
Am I correct?
Yes,
11.
ma'am.
Now let's
Yes, yes, ma'am.
minus A is equal to 11 1 by 11, 11 5 by 55. Right? Any reduction further possible? Any
No, ma'am.
reduction further possible?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. So the value becomes A equals to minus 18 by 5. Am I correct or wrong?
Ma'am, correct.
Ma'am, correct.
Huh?
Ma'am, correct.
18 by
Ma'am,
5
correct.
minus A equals to 18 by 5. So A equals to minus 18 by 5. Is it fine?
Yes, ma'am.
So it was
Yes,
more
ma'am.
likely. Now which question? Which question? Anyone? From 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Any? जितने भी क्वेश्चन हैं
Ma'am, second D part.
सेकेंड बी पार्ट
Ma'am, D part. Ma'am, D.
डी और बी बी फॉर बॉल
Ma'am, ma'am, D for dog.
बुक
Ma'am, before that.
ओके दैट इज see we know the rules we are just doing right or wrong so was I not
Yes,
wrong,
ma'am.
right in doing it from the first day
इको हो रही है आवाज उनकी.
2x upon 3 minus x upon sorry x upon
Ma'am, 2.
2 is equal to
2.
30. Fraction have to be solved first,
Ma'am,
then only we
30.
can cross multiply. Yes or no? We can.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So what is the LCM of 3 and 2? LCM of 3 and 2 is how much?
Ma'am, 6. Ma'am, 6. 6.
6. So am I correct in writing 2x into 2 minus x into 3? Am I correct? Or
Yes,
if you
ma'am.
are doing calculation, if you are doing
Yes, ma'am.
calculation, 2 to the 4x minus 3x. If you are good in calculation, both are same. अगर कैलकुलेशन में अच्छे हो तो ये तरीका है लिखने का, अगर नहीं हो तो वाला स्टेप करो. मेरी बात समझ में आई?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
सही
Yes.
तरीका ये है लिखने का, सही तरीका ये है लिखने का. अगर आप कैलकुलेशन में खराब हो तो जैसे पहले लिखा था वैसे लिखो. मेरी बात समझ में आई?
Yes, ma'am.
गलती करने से अच्छा है पार्ट्स में काम करना, राइट? गलती करने से अच्छा है पार्ट्स में
Okay, ma'am.
काम. ओके नाउ that is equal to 30. Now what happened? 4x minus x by 6 equal to 30. So how much is x equal to? How much is x equal to? How much is x equal to?
Ma'am, X is equal to 30 into 6.
180. 180. 6 3 18. 180. Am I correct or wrong?
Yes, ma'am. Correct. Ma'am, correct.
Understood? So,
Yes, ma'am.
if
Yes,
again
ma'am.
I'm saying, if you are good in calculation, do it directly. If you are
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, next one.
Yes, ma'am.
Next one, whichever you want. Next one, whichever you want.
Ma'am, third B.
3B.
Third part B.
3B.
Ma'am, B. Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
B for
ma'am.
ball.
Yes, ma'am. B for ball.
Please dictate the question for me. It will be fast then.
Ma'am,
5.
5 plus
Ma'am, 5
9x.
plus 9x
Ma'am,
and
minus
minus
7 is
7.
equal to.
Minus 7. Minus 7 is equal to.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
9x.
9x minus 2 minus x minus.
Ma'am, 9x minus
Ma'am,
2
minus
minus
2
x.
minus x. Ma'am, minus x.
So here I am 9x minus 2. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And here
Yes, ma'am.
I have 8x minus 2. गलत है कि सही है जरा देखो तो ये लग रहा है गड़बड़ है जो सही है सही सॉल्व हुआ यहाँ तक अब क्या करेंगे नाउ व्हाट वी शुड डू नाउ व्हाट वी शुड डू इसके बाद क्या करना है क्लास शब्द आंसर व्हाट्स द नेक्स्ट स्टेप see 8 and from here 9x minus 8x is equal to minus 2 minus 2 plus 2 0 am I correct
Yes, ma'am.
that
Yes,
is minus 2 plus 2 becomes 0 yes or no minus 2 when goes to that side
yes,
becomes
ma'am.
plus 2 and minus 2 and plus 2 is equal to how much
Ma'am, 0.
0
Ma'am, 0.
Zero.
so that means x is equal to how much correct
Yes, ma'am.
8 minus 9 minus 8 is x and x is equal to 0
Ma'am, 0.
okay next one whichever you want
Ma'am, D.
which b d
Ma'am,
for
4th
dog
D.
huh d for
Yes,
dog
ma'am. 4th D.
fourth d
Ma'am, fourth D.
fourth d okay whichever you want देखो ओपन है आज आप टीचर्स हम स्टूडेंट हैं राइट और रॉन्ग यस और नो टीचर्स आर गिविंग me
Yes, ma'am.
questions and I must be solving it for you right if so many teachers are giving me questions to solve and I am solving it for them what should be done we have to open the brackets right and then balance yes or no
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am is equal
Yes,
to
ma'am.
2. Ma'am, 2 in bracket 5 plus 3.
5 plus
Ma'am,
3 or p plus 3
In bracket.
Ma'am, P
no,
plus
ma'am.
3.
P plus 3.
that we have got
Ma'am,
p plus
bracket close minus 8.
okay let's open implies that you know why I told you we use implies that just now yes or no
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes,
implies
ma'am.
that 3p 2 into 2 minus 4p minus minus plus 2 5 and 10 am I correct
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
okay here 2p plus 6 2 into p is 2p 2 plus 6 minus 8 clear am I correct
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
okay now
Yes, ma'am.
minus p plus 10 and here 2p minus 2 correct
Yes, ma'am.
okay
Yes, ma'am.
minus p minus transposition correct? Is the transposition correct or not?
Ma'am, correct.
Ma'am, correct.
Okay. So I am left in the LHS as minus 3p and on the RHS as minus 12. So p is equal to 4. Minus 12 by minus 3 is 4. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Easy or difficult?
Ma'am, easy.
Ma'am, easy. Ma'am, easy.
Okay. Now which one? You have time. जब तक टाइम है वो बोलते हो करते आएंगे. जब तक टाइम है बोलते हो तो मेथड तो सबको आता ही है, राइट?
Yes, ma'am.
जब तक टाइम है जितने क्वेश्चन बोलोगे उतने करेंगे. नेक्स्ट क्लास में हम लोग वो करेंगे, क्या कहते हैं, वर्ड प्रॉब्लम. ठीक है?
Okay, ma'am.
जब तक टाइम है बोल दो. अगला कौन सा करें? बोलो. जो बोलना है बोलो. मैंने रोका थोड़ी ना है.
Ma'am, this
हाँ कौन सा?
exercise. Ma'am,
हाँ
few
बोलो.
parts.
कौन सा?
Ma'am, few parts.
5 तो सुना. 5 के बाद क्या?
Ma'am, few parts.
सी. सी फॉर कैट.
Ma'am, ma'am, few. Ma'am, K.
K for kite. 5K.
Yes,
Purvi?
ma'am.
5K. My class is open for everyone. Yes or no? So anyone can give a question. Don't shy. Don't feel shy. Please read the 7K. 7K.
Ma'am, plus 2.
7X or K? 7X.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
7x.
7x.
X.
Ma'am, in bracket x
Ma'am, in
plus
brackets x
2.
plus 2
Ma'am is
is
equal
equal
to
to
20 minus.
x in brackets 2x minus 5.
Ma'am in bracket
Brackets
2x
2x minus
minus
5.
5. Minus 5.
First step is to opening of bracket. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Like
ma'am.
that.
Yes, ma'am.
Plus 2x plus 4. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Here is 20 plus 20 minus 2x plus 5. Right or wrong?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, correct.
Then 7 plus 2 is 9x plus 4. And here is 25 minus 2x. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, okay. 9x plus 2x and 25 minus 4. सही है?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So how much? 9 plus 2 is 11, right?
Yes, ma'am.
9 plus 2
Yes,
is
ma'am.
11 and 25 minus 4 is how much?
Ma'am, 21. Ma'am, 21.
Ma'am, 21.
21. So 11x equals to 21. So x is equal to how much? 21 by,
Ma'am, 21 upon 11.
right?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any other next question? Whichever.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
Q
in
part.
5 Q part.
Ma'am, Q.
Queen.
Ma'am, Q.
Q for
Ma'am,
queen. Q for
yes,
queen.
of queen.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Q for queen.
हम तुम लोग को ABCD भी सिखा देते हैं, right? I teach you ABCD also, right or wrong?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
That was fantastic. Go for 0.5x minus.
Ma'am, minus in brackets 0.8. Ma'am, minus 0.2x.
Then
Ma'am is equal to
Ma'am is equal to
0.4x
0.4x
0.7.
Ma'am, plus
Ma'am,
0.7.
plus 0.7.
Let's open the bracket first. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
0.5x minus 0.8 plus 0.x. Here 0.4x plus 0.7. Clear, am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then point 0.5 plus point 0.2 is how much?
Ma'am, 0.7.
Ma'am, 0.7x.
Minus 0.8 and here is again copy. Right? Now 0.7x minus 0.4x is equal to 0.7 plus 0.8. Am I correct in transposition? Am I correct in doing transposition?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So how much is point 0.7 minus point 0.4?
Ma'am, 0.3.
0.3x. And how much is 0.7 plus 0.8?
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
0.15.
Ma'am, ma'am 0.15.
0.
Class 7
Ma'am,
class
1.5.
1.5. That's what I was saying. 1.5. So x is equal to how much? 1.5 by point 0.3. Point at 15 by 3. 5. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
1.5 by
Yes, ma'am.
point 0.3. Point is after one position, so the decimal will be removed. Yes? We are left with 15 by 3. And 15 by 3 is equal to how much? 5.
Ma'am, 5.
Right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, any other question?
Yes, ma'am.
Hmm. Which one?
Ma'am, 5p.
5 तो है
Ma'am,
5 के बाद कौन सा?
ma'am, p.
हाँ?
Ma'am, p for parrot.
P for parrot. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All the decimal ones they are making me do, right? अच्छा कैलकुलेशन होगा करो हम टेबल भी करें. I'll just do the calculation. Is it fine? Okay. Again the LCM technique to be used. Yes or no? Again the LCM technique has to be used to resolve it. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
0.75 plus
Ma'am, plus
5.
5.
That will be added easily. Point 0.5 or 5?
Ma'am, only 5.
Ma'am, 5.
So LCM is 2. 2 into 0.5 is how much? 1. So that
Ma'am,
is
1.
x. X plus x. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
And it is 5.75.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
yes, ma'am.
So 2x by 2 is equal to 5.75. So 2x equals to how much? अरे भाई 2 और 2 कैंसिल नहीं हो जाएगा?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
This way and this will cancel. Reduce, reduction. 2 into x upon
Yes,
2 ही
ma'am.
तो हुआ. 2x का मतलब क्या है? 2 into x हुआ या नहीं?
Yes, ma'am.
So we are
Yes,
left.
ma'am.
So x is equal to how much?
Ma'am, 5.75.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
x is equal to
5.75.
5.75.
So that or you have to keep in mind and open be alert with all the calculation techniques. मेरी बात समझ में आ रही है?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
जितनी भी आपको कैलकुलेशन टेक्निक्स पता है सबको एक साथ याद रखना पड़ेगा, तभी क्वेश्चंस को आसानी से कर पाओगे, नहीं तो अपने क्वेश्चन को डिफिकल्ट कर डालोगे। राइट और रॉन्ग?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
नहीं तो अगर हमारे बच्चों को मैथ बिल्कुल आता नहीं तो हम क्या करते, पहले 2 से मल्टीप्लाई करते, फिर 2 से डिवाइड करते। राइट और रॉन्ग?
Yes, ma'am.
A lengthy process.
Yes, ma'am.
So keep all these rules, laws, points which we have done in previous so many. Right?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Do we have time?
Yes, ma'am.
Or we should end the class? Do we have time or we should end the class? क्या बोलते हो? Can you do now? Now can you complete the exercise on your own?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we are left with only one exercise, which is the last exercise of this half yearly syllabus, and then we will be free, right? And we will be starting with the revisions, and revisions are what? You have to, now your difficulty session starts. Means you have to assemble all the questions which you feel, ma'am, please solve for me. Right? And we will be discussing in the class and solving together. Not your ma'am will be the only teacher. The other students will all be also be here teacher who will be telling their own methods to solve that particular question. Okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
मतलब
Okay, ma'am.
for example, Mansi has given us a Mansi has Mansi not. I don't know the original name, whatever is written. I can see Zaina. Zaina has given us a question, and before I will be solving, the other students will be solving who knows that. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So,
Yes.
so that will help you in having a revision also. Yes or no? Of your concept,
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay. So with this I end my
Yes.
today's class. I end my today's class and we are left with one chapter only. Thank one exercise only. Thank you and have a nice day.